Hello, my name is Pastor Andy Schreier from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Edna, Texas. Today we continue our video series on the most misused, misunderstood, misquoted verses of the Bible by looking at Psalm 23, verse 4. Now this may blow your mind if you can get your brain wrapped around it, but not everything we say in English should be understood literally. For example, I doubt that the previous statement literally made your mind explode or that you physically twisted your brain around it. Such phrases are called idioms. And the Bible contains a boatload of idioms. That's an idiom. Not everything we read in the Bible should be understood literally. Now, before you go bananas, hold your horses and take this with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that the Bible isn't literally true or that it is open to subjective interpretation. The Bible is God's Word. God says what He means and means what He says. God chose to reveal His truth to us in human language. And every language of the world, including Hebrew and Greek, the original languages of the Bible, utilizes idioms and other figures of speech to communicate. As we read the Bible, we need to pay attention to common figures of speech like metaphors and similes and hyperbole, as well as idioms, so that we can understand the literal truths God is revealing to us. And a good example of such idiomatic speech can be found in Psalm 23, verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I'm sure you're on pins and needles to find out what that verse means. So I promise I won't beat around the bush. Let's dive in and get the ball rolling. Psalm 23 is really an extended metaphor. According to Webster's dictionary, a metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase, literally denoting one kind of object or idea, is used in place of another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them. In other words, a metaphor is a comparison. In Psalm 23, David calls the Lord a shepherd. David was not saying that God literally works tending sheep in a field. In the same way, by calling God our shepherd, David was not calling us literal sheep. This is an analogy, a comparison. Just as a shepherd provides for his sheep by leading them to green pastures and clean drinking water, God provides for our material needs. As Luther wrote, God richly and daily provides clothing and shoes, food and drink, house and home, land, cattle, and all that I own, and all that I need for my body and life. But our good shepherd doesn't just provide for our physical needs. He also provides for our spiritual needs. He restores our souls and leads us in paths of righteousness with His word and sacraments. In other words, our good shepherd provides all that we need for our bodies and souls. But then in verse 4, David reminds us why we never need to be afraid. Our good shepherd is with us wherever we go. He protects us like a shepherd who protects his sheep with his rod and his staff. And that's why we don't need to be afraid even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now, when most people read that phrase, they think that David was saying that we don't need to be afraid of death or dying. But in the Hebrew language, the phrase shadow of death was actually an idiom that means something extraordinarily dark. Really, really, really dark. David's focus wasn't on death, but on the darkness. In other words, David was saying, even though I walk through the darkest of valleys, I will fear no evil. You see, in ancient times, traveling through a dark valley was dangerous. You could get lost or injured. Robbers could hide and attack you. Maybe a modern paraphrase might sound something like this. Even though I walk through a dark alley in the bad part of Houston, Texas at 2 o'clock in the morning, I will fear no evil. In other words, when we find ourselves in the darkest and scariest places and moments in our lives, we don't need to be afraid. Our good shepherd is by our side the entire way, protecting us with his rod and staff. You don't have to be afraid, even when you walk through the valley of COVID or cancer, even when you find yourself in the dark days of divorce, even when the economy is crumbling, even when war rages around you. Your good shepherd will be by your side, watching over you and making sure that it all works together for your good. That being said, the phrase, the valley of the shadow of death, does also include the dark days of death. I mean, even as we stand at the bedside of our loved ones, watching them gasp their final breaths, even as we close our own eyelids to death, we don't need to be afraid. Our good shepherd will be by our side the entire time. Remember, this is the good shepherd who gave his life for us, his sheep. This is the good shepherd who suffered our punishment in our place so that we could be forgiven. This is the good shepherd who rose on the third day and conquered death so that we could be sure that we will live even though we die. This is the good shepherd who, at our dying breath, will take our hand and lead us home to heaven. So in the end, it's not wrong for people to think of death when they hear the phrase, the valley of the shadow of death. But understand that David was saying much more than that. When you find yourself facing dark days and dark valleys in your life, when you find yourself in danger or even facing death, you never have to be afraid. Your good shepherd is with you every step of the way. Literally.